Good morning, Pat. I'm doing very well. Appreciate you joining us this morning. Well, I have about 9:01 on my watch, and I'm sure maybe there'll be others joining us, but I think we'll get our program started this morning. We certainly appreciate everyone joining us. We'd like to welcome you to our first in a series of webinars for printing knowledge. We're very excited to be offering this program on paper knowledge for full color printing. And based on the response to our first topic, we feel webinars will prove to be a great way for us to educate you, our customers, on many topics in the future. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. If you have questions during today's webinar, you can submit the question from your screen by clicking on the Send To, select myself, Ken Sperling, and type your question. I will try to incorporate your questions during the webinar, or you may collect your questions and we will allow audio questions at the end of the program as well. If you have not used GoToMeeting before, you can minimize the tool palette that's on the right of your screen by clicking on the arrows on the tab, so you'll have a full screen view of the presentation. You can maximize the tool palette to submit questions by clicking on the same tab. You'll be receiving an email survey after this program. We would appreciate your input on how to improve the program. Since this web tool is fairly new to us, we want to make sure that we improve your experience. So we understand that your time is precious. We'll keep these webinars to 30 minutes or less with question and answer periods at the end. So let's get started. Why did we choose paper knowledge for our full color printing? We find more of our distributors are selling full color printing, and we have had many requests for information on this specific topic. We have chosen to concentrate on paper for full color printing because we can fit this information into a more manageable time frame. Most of the information we will discuss is true for both full color offset printing and digital color printing. If there are differences, I'll be sure and make a specific reference to them as we go along. Do you look like this when you're trying to choose a paper for your customer's full color print project? I hope by the end of the webinar you will feel more confident in your choices. Choosing the paper for your customer's print project should depend on how that product is manufactured and how the printed piece will be used. Choosing the right paper for the application will guarantee a happy customer. Many projects require more than just printing. They may require folding, punching, die cutting, embossing, maybe an application of UV, varnish, or aqueous coatings. Each of these processes place specific demands on the paper, and choosing the right paper can make the difference between a happy and an unhappy customer. Paper manufacturers offer many grades of paper to withstand those demands and ensure trouble-free performance for your customers' needs. Most full color printing, or process printing, is produced on coated paper. Some people relate coated paper to glossy paper, and this is not true. Not all coated papers are glossy. Coated paper means that the paper has coatings which make the surface less porous and smoother. And why is coated paper the preferred stock for process printing? Well, process printing inks and toners require that we keep the ink and toner from being absorbed into the paper. Coated papers also are very opaque and minimize show-through. When you're printing a 4/4 job with lots of ink coverage, you want to minimize show-through on the sheet. Now, coated paper comes in many different finishes. The most popular finishes are gloss, matte, and dull. There are many advantages to each finish. You should choose the finish that meets the demands of your particular print project. Gloss finish is the most popular finish. Gloss finishes, which produce the sharpest reproduction of halftones and colors, are very effective for documents with illustrations, pictures, and graphics. A glossy finish will catch the eye of the reader and maximize the impact of the printed piece. Matte finishes are the second most popular. Sometimes matte and dull finishes are difficult to tell apart. A matte finish paper is preferred by most press operators because it tends to be a bulkier sheet and it's easier to run on the press. And the matte finish has a superior lithographic reproduction. A matte finish has a glare-free background and is more opaque than a similar weight of dull finish. A dull finish is used when good ink holdout is desired, but the background needs to be completely non-glare. Dull finishes are great for printed projects that have a lot of text, because with no glare, the dull finish makes the material easier to read because of less reflectance. The disadvantage is the color does not pop like you see with the glossy finish. There are two other finishes that you will sometimes see. A silk finish is in between a gloss and a dull, and in the amount of the shininess. Only a few paper manufacturers use this term. Another popular term you may have heard of is cast-coated. Cast-coated is an extremely shiny finish with a mirror-like image. The paper is super calendared to create this finish. This mirror-like image is very eye-catching, but also very expensive. Now let's open our paper swatch book that I mailed to all of you and do some comparison of gloss, matte, and cast-coated sheets. Note that we have perforated each sheet so that you can tear out a small sample to give to your customers. To be able to distinctly see the differences, it is important that you hold the paper at the proper angle to the light. Move the angle of the book around until the differences become more noticeable. Now move the first sheet in the book up slightly so that you can compare the 80-pound gloss text to the 80-pound matte text. See how the light in the room may have some glare on the gloss sheet, but also see how the colors on the gloss sheet seem to pop more than the matte sheet. Now compare the 100-pound gloss cover to the 12-point cast-coated C1S cover. All of a sudden that gloss cover sheet, which seems so shiny, is practically dull compared to the cast-coated sheet. Let's talk about the last two sheets in this swatch book, the 12-point C1S and the 100-pound uncoated cover. Now just so that we're clear on terms, C1S stands for coated one side, and that means that one side is coated and the opposite side is uncoated. C2S means that both sides are coated. All of the papers in this book are suitable for our HP digital color press. Our digital color press uses liquid toners versus dry toners, which are used by most digital printers. Our liquid toners give you an offset quality look to the printing. But in order to adhere the toners to an uncoated sheet, we have to apply a special substance to the sheet, or the uncoated side of the sheet in the case of a C1S. Adding this top dressing to the sheet makes the paper more expensive. So when your print project requires using digital printing, an uncoated sheet will always be more expensive than a coated sheet, which is not true of offset printing. So now that we've chosen the finish for your printed piece, you will now need to consider the weight of the sheet. How the printed piece will be used will have a bearing on the weight of the stock that you choose. The three basic weights for coated papers are text, cover, and board weights. Text is the lightest weight of the three. and the most popular weights for text weights are 60 pound, 70 pound, 80 pound, and 100 pound. Text weight is great for brochures, sell sheets, flyers, pages to a booklet, and many other items. Cover weight papers are much heavier, and the most popular weights for cover weights are 65, 80, 100, and 120 pound. Cover weight stocks are great for postcards, business cards, covers to booklets and brochures, and sell sheets where stiffness is required. Board weights is our third, and they are measured in points instead of pounds. The most popular weights are 8 point, 10 point, and 12 point. While not equal, a 10-point sheet is approximately equal to a 100-pound cover. Take a moment to feel the difference in the weights of the different samples in the swatch book. I have a question from Mike Hattie that I'd like to respond to. His question is, why is absorption a bad thing? Well, in order to get the proper look and feel to process printing inks are more transparent or less opaque than regular inks. And if the ink is absorbed into the paper, then the true color does not come through of the printed piece. And so we want the ink or toners to lay right on top of the sheet to give us the true colors and look that we're looking for. So let's move on. A special note is that keep in mind that not all paper is created equal. An 80-pound text from one paper manufacturer may be slightly heavier or more bulky than a different paper manufacturer. And how glossy a sheet is may vary from manufacturer to manufacturer as well. Most of your customers will not be able to tell the difference between different brands. But if they are savvy enough to know, you may want to request a specific brand. Generally speaking, most printers have house sheets, and these house sheets are what you will receive unless you specify a specific brand. Generally, the house sheets are a good value because the printer purchases a lot and keeps the cost down. And generally, the house sheet will be a mid-range or higher grade, which will meet 95% of your customers' needs. So back to the weight of papers. The weight of the stock you choose should be dependent on how the printed piece will be used and the look and feel your customer is looking for. Obviously, your customer's budget for the project may have a bearing on the weight that you choose as well. The heavier the weight of the sheet, the more expensive the paper is. Some other notable features of all paper that you should understand are opacity, brightness, and whiteness. Opacity of the paper affects the show-through of the copy from side to side. Your paper choice for a piece that's printed one side could be very different from a piece which is printed two sides. The more opaque a sheet is, the less show-through you will have. The brightness of a paper is determined by the amount of light it reflects. A paper with 100% brightness rating would reflect all light from its surface. Most papers have brightness ratings that fall between 60 and 90%. The addition of fluorescent dyes to the paper stock can result in brightness ratings in excess of 90%. Generally, premium papers are rated between 88 and 95%. A number 1 grade sheet will have ratings from 85 to 87.9, and a number 2 grade sheet will have ratings between 83 and 84.9. As you probably know, based on any painting you may have done around the house, white is not always white. A paper is perceived as white when it equally reflects all rays of the visible spectrum to the eye. However, if two equally bright sheets are placed side by side and one sheet reflects slightly more blue rays of the spectrum, the eye will perceive this sheet to be whiter. For this reason, some paper manufacturers actually dye white paper so that the blue rays are emphasized. Now let's talk about some of the questions that you need to ask that may bear on the weight and finish you choose for your customer's print project. Is the piece going to be folded? Generally speaking, coated papers do not fold as well as uncoated stocks. Coated stocks tend to be more brittle, and therefore they tend to crack easier than uncoated stocks. The heavier the weight, the more cracking will occur. In order to minimize cracking, paper can be scored before folding. And paper heavier than 80-pound text we require here in our plant to be scored before folding. This adds to the cost to produce the printed piece, so in turn increases the selling price for print projects on heavier weights of stock. Another factor in the quality of the fold is the grain direction of the paper. All paper has a grain direction. Paper folds more evenly if folded with the grain or parallel to the grain. To illustrate this, please take that 8.5 by 11 sheet I sent you with the paper swatch book that has the perforations on it, and remove the top left portion of the sheet by tearing along the perforations. Little test for everybody this morning here. Now take the left piece and fold along the line from top to bottom. Once you've finished that, remove the top right portion of the sheet and fold along that line. Now compare the two. You'll notice that the right piece has a smoother fold than the left piece, as illustrated in 18.2 on your screen. That's because you have folded it parallel to the grain of the paper. So how can you tell the grain direction of a paper? Well, sometimes you can tell by the curl of the paper or how it tears, but I think my way is the easiest and the most fun. So tear out the corner of that top right sheet that you just folded and lick the back of the sheet. Pretty sanitary idea, huh? And once you lick it, set it down on the table in front of you. You'll notice that as time goes on, the sheet will tend to curl. The direction of the grain runs along the valley of the curl as illustrated in 18-4 on your screen. So that's how you can tell the grain direction of a sheet you might be looking at. So now that you understand grain direction and the effects it has on paper, let's talk about some other factors you should consider when selecting a paper for a print project. Is the printed piece going to be mailed, and how will it be addressed? A mail piece must meet certain requirements of thickness to be accepted by the post office. The post office requires that a postcard be at least 7/1000ths of an inch thick. But paper at the lower range of postal requirements may not make it through their sorting equipment as well as heavier weights of paper. If your customer wants the postcard they are mailing to arrive in good shape, we suggest a 100-pound cover as a good choice. If the mail piece is being addressed with an inkjet method, a C1S stock where the address is placed on the uncoated side might be a good choice. When we address postcards on our high-speed inkjet unit that are printed on C2S or coated both sides paper, we have to slow the machine down to allow more time for the ink to dry under our infrared dryer. This will allow the ink to dry well enough to be able to be put into trays. On a small run of 5,000 pieces or less, this may not make much of a difference in the price charged. On a 100,000 run, it could make substantial difference in the speed and the price that you're charged for addressing the piece. Obviously, if you're applying pre-printed address labels or addressing the piece right on the press like we do on our HP Indigo, the uncoated side becomes irrelevant. We do not have time today to talk in detail about some of the other features which have a bearing on your choice of paper, but let's just mention quickly some important ones. Your customer's project may require some type of spot or flood coating to be applied to the printed sheet. The most popular coatings are UV, varnishes, and aqueous coatings. These coatings are sometimes used to give special look or a special effect to the printed piece. Or sometimes they're applied to protect the printing for certain applications like mailing. These varnishes come in gloss or matte, depending on the look that you want to achieve. Generally speaking, varnishes and UV coatings must only be applied to coated sheets. These coatings are either applied from an additional color unit on a printing press, or they can be applied offline as an offline operation. Other features such as die cutting, embossing, perforating, foil stamping require that you consult with your printer. Each of those operations requires that the paper have certain characteristics. I'm afraid we have run out of time, so let's just take a second to review before we move on to the question and answer portion of our webinar. Coated paper is not necessarily glossy paper. The most popular weights of coated paper finishes for coated paper is gloss, matte, and dull. Another is silk and cast coated. The most popular weights for text is 60, 70, and 80 and 100 pound. The most popular weights for cover are 65, 80, and 100 pound. Some papers are measured in points, not pounds. Grain direction has an effect on the quality of a fold and the strength of a perforation. Heavier weights of paper require scoring prior to folding. How the printed piece is going to be used will have a bearing on your paper selection. And finally, always consult with your printer when it comes to any special features that you may have.